Sweet. Welcome, everyone. We are at the Launch a New Co-op workshop. This is a Cooperative Foundations workshop brought to you by Cooperation STL. Go to the next slide. Cooperation STL is a local group of folks in St. Louis that's working to build an ecosystem for cooperatives here. And we have a series of different programs that we offer throughout the year. So this is a Cooperative Foundations workshop. We also do co-op skill shares where we bring in co-ops from outside the community or folks inside of the community to share how different industries or different like styles of co-ops work. And then we also do co-op talks where we can dive into more of the details, maybe about like the operation and governance of co-ops, and kind of share from Co-op STL, but also with our community about different skills and tools that are out there. Next slide. So tonight, our three core team members are here. We're going to introduce ourselves in our next introduction activity, but we're our crew of volunteers that keep all this programming going. So we also want to know who else is in the room. And we say type in the chat, but I think we can maybe just come off mute and share. Could be fun. So I'll kick it off and then pass it to someone else. My name is Jenny. I'm with Co-op STL, and I'm a worker owner at Garrity Tools here in St. Louis. My pronouns are she, her, and my favorite local business is Parker's Table Wine Shop. I'm going to pass it to M.
Hello. My name's Em, and I grew up in Jefferson City, but actually I live in New York now. And yeah, I love St. Louis, but I currently go to school at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, and I've been studying cooperatives, and I'm interested in potentially starting one after I finish school. We'll see. I gotta test it out. Yeah, but I've been seeing what you all do in your work, and I love it.
Awesome. Thanks for being
Awesome. It's great
here.
to hear.
Do you want to pass it to someone?
Oh yeah. Let's do Christopher.
Thank
Hey, I'm Chris Wilcox. My pronouns are he, him. I'm with Cooperation STL, one of the three core team. It's a favorite local business. I'd say there's some good restaurants that I really like. Let's see, I remember eating at the Egg and I with my sister one time. It was pretty good. And Taste of Persia was, I think, the last place we went on Grand a few weeks ago. That was a good one.
Nice.
And I'll pass it to Jenny.
Oh, I kicked it off. I'm going to
Oh,
pass
you're
it
right. Pass it to
to
Sandy.
Carly.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. My name is Carly Faye. I work currently at St. Louis Community College in the college prep department. But I also am an artist, and I'm interested in a potential both kind of more of a landscaping co-op and or testing the waters of what it would need to have a particular photography as well, which I think somewhat exists here, but I'm kind of interested also in film developing as well. So yeah, pronouns she, her, and also favorite local business. Jenny, I'm gonna actually have to agree with you on the Parker Stable. I sing their praises all the time, and they live kind of, or I live very near, and so it's just a good one.
Nice. All right, Sandy, last but not least.
Hi everyone, my name is Zondi Barrett. I'm a member of the Co-op STL core team. I use she, they pronouns. Um, and my favorite local business has to be Pizza Head. It's, in my opinion, the best New York style pizza we have here. And also they have vegan pepperoni, which means I can get pepperoni pizza. Um, and also, it's funny that you mentioned photography co-ops because the example we're using tonight is like a fake art-based co-op. So maybe there'll be some ideas of how that could look tonight.
Nice.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourselves. So I'm just going to do a bit kind of overview of what we're doing tonight. So what we will do, we're going to discuss the benefits and challenges of starting a co-op, kind of talk about and run through the timeline from your idea to launching the co-op. And throughout it, we'll use, as Zani just referenced, a fictional example to kind of like walk through the process. What we might do is elaborate on concepts based on your questions. So the chat is open. It's a small group tonight too, so feel free to come off mute. Um, and then what we won't do, we're not going to go in depth on how you can launch your specific co-op. We also won't provide a way to launch a co-op that works for all. Beauty of co-ops is that it's a very creative model, and you can get there's no prescription for how it needs to work. Next slide. So we have these community agreements that we like to kind of present at the beginning of all of our workshops. And we hope that everyone can agree to this as we move through our presentation tonight. So one is no one knows everything. Together we know a lot. To be curious and open. Speak from your own experience. We have take space, make space. Why am I talking? Why aren't I talking? So thinking about how much we're sharing and how much space we're providing for others. To remember that we can't be articulate all the time. So just giving the benefit of the doubt and asking questions. And then confidentiality. So don't use specifics if you don't have permission or don't want them shared later. As we mentioned at the beginning, we are recording this. So we typically post our workshops to YouTube and then have them linked on our website as well for future folks who weren't able to attend. Um, and we just like to put out, does everyone feel like those work for them tonight? Are there any other agreements that you might want to add to this list? You can give a video thumbs up. You can chat it, whatever. Awesome. I saw some thumbs up. Sweet. So I'm going to kind of start us off here too with just the what is a co-op? Um, so in terms of who's in the room, we got a little bit of info from y'all, but we never know. Folks come to these. When I started learning about co-ops, like 3, 4 years ago, I had zero knowledge. So the basics, what is a co-op? A cooperative is a self-governing group of people who voluntarily work together to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So this is the definition that co-op STL typically uses. And we like to just have this little kind of graphic at the bottom to illustrate like the idea with a co-op is that it's owned by the members, it's controlled by the members, and it benefits them. So there's a group of people that are doing all of those things to help an organization, a business move forward and run. Next slide. Some vocab for today's workshop. I just said this one, member benefiting. What is a member? A member is an individual that contributes to and shares ownership of a co-op. So sometimes the members at different co-ops have different words that are used to describe them. So like at Garrity Tools, we call ourselves worker owners, not members, but those are the same thing. It's the people that own the co-op. Benefit, so that is the outcome a cooperative is designed to produce for its members. So that could be a share in profits, it could be a discount on the goods that you're purchasing together, and it varies a lot depending on the type of co-op that you're working with. And then governance. So governance is the system under which members make decisions for the cooperative. So oftentimes when we think about maybe like starting a new business, there's a lot of like the operations that go into it. But when a business is set up as a co-op, we also want to think really deeply about the governance and how basically we're making decisions together because it's not just one person. They don't need to consult, right? They can just like run their business. When we have a lot of people making decisions, or even just three, having a clear system for how we work together to run this thing is important. So that's what governance is. Next slide. All right. Why start a co-op? So many reasons. We tried to summarize it here. First thing, practices equitable relationships. So when you're starting a new idea, a new business, forming it as a co-op is a really great way to make sure that the people who are working on this project are sharing in those benefits. And it can also just ensure that the relationships between all the people that are doing the labor get to like benefit from the labor. So it's a great practice in equitable relationships. Rooted in community, generally, if we're learning to work with other people and run a project, an organization, a business together. We're building community with folks. Co-ops generally are also really kind of dedicated to caring for their communities. It's like a general principle of co-ops. So it's a great way to kind of tap into sort of local, depending on the project, and really local community and really connect with people. Also, long-term resilience when it's multiple people investing their time, their resources, and knowing that they're getting benefits out of this. Uh, it just means that there are more heads in the game when it comes to making a business work. A example of this, a friend of mine works at a design cooperative, a graphic design cooperative, and when the pandemic happened and they started losing business, because they were a co-op and there were like five owners, it was everybody like pulling in, like where could we get another client from? Where could we do this? Where if it was just a single owner and the people that were getting the paycheck, that single owner might be like, well, I'm just going to lay off like half of my workforce to make it move forward, right? So that long-term resilience really comes into play. It also disrupts oppressive systems in terms of how ownership works in America and capitalism. Generally, ownership is not something that is accessible to all people or even very many people. So when you form a co-op and you have a clear path to ownership, it's really exciting because that means that it's opening up opportunities for folks that have been systemically kind of taken away from that opportunity. So whether that's by gender, race, sexuality, all of those things, it provides a clear path for folks to own something, which is cool. And then shares benefits and responsibilities between members. So, kind of back to that long-term resilience piece as well. When you have multiple people invested in owning a project, a company, it means that you're able to kind of spread the responsibility. Again, you get to share in the benefits, but it also, if anyone here has ever run something by themselves, it can be pretty overwhelming and can be cause a little bit of burnout for sure. So having more people on board can be really helpful in terms of sharing that burden and the joy of the successes of the co-op. Next slide. All right, challenges. So high level overview here. Basically, learning to share power can be a new skill. Some of the kind of the last slide, what the benefits are. A lot of the benefits are not rooted in ways that we are used to working in our workplaces, in our communities where we're working together and we're cooperating. So there's definitely a bit of a learning curve, and it's important to make sure that you're sort of bringing everybody along on that journey and providing resources so that folks can be ready to, resolve conflict together, make big decisions together, all that. You also need to share governance, management, and operations responsibility. And sometimes it can be difficult to like get into those new roles. So again, some of this comes back just to training and being we'll talk about this throughout the workshop, but like the sort of like roadmap to getting started, making sure you take the time to ensure everybody has the skills that they need. And it can just be important to have processes in place so that you can really be clear on who's responsible for what. And then one of the other challenges that isn't sort of internal to co-ops, but more external, is that banks are often unfamiliar with co-ops and financing can be more difficult. So when you have an operating agreement that says, we're going to have we have this many owners, and the potential of like five new owners joining in the next like 2 years, a bank is like, well, who's liable for this loan that I'm going to give you? So there's a growing ecosystem of other ways to get funding for co-ops now, but uh, it can be a little bit you got to get a little bit creative in terms of more non-traditional funding for projects. I know some of y'all already shared this when we checked in at the beginning, but we love if you'll want to, yeah, share in the chat or come off mute. But just what if you came here for a specific reason, whether it's fully fleshed out or just like an inkling of an idea for a new co-op, why don't you all drop it in the chat and we'll sort of see. It'll be helpful as we go through the presentation just to kind of know what like industries or where y'all are thinking of cooperating.
I guess I could go music industry.
Mm, cool.
In the chat, sorry.
No, I also said come off. That's great. Come off mute. I'm gonna say we did a Skillshare with Subvert last month, this month. And that'll be up on our YouTube soon, but it's a great it's like a predecessor to Bandcamp that's cooperatively owned. So music industry
They're
stuff.
very, very
Yeah.
timely and appropriate, right?
Sandy says
Yeah.
housing, co-op community land trust,
Mhm.
hybrid.
Yes, love community land trust.
Nice. I know earlier Carly Faye said landscaping, photography. So we've got a good mix of stuff in the room. Cool. Construction co-ops. Yes. All right. I'm gonna hand it over to Zandi from here.
All right, so the rest of the workshop tonight, we're going to go through this timeline that I've got up here that basically takes you from you have this idea that you're starting out with, you're creating this, you're starting down the path. How can you get basically to kind of your early stages of the co-op? And so we think about this timeline through about five different major steps. The first one is finding alignment, and we'll talk about all the different aspects of that as we go through the workshop tonight. And then determine your membership and governance. So you're thinking about how you're actually going to work together. Identifying funding sources. As we said, sometimes financing can be difficult, but there are options out there. And so we'll talk about what some of those might be, and how you can start to reach out to some of those resources. Talking to a lawyer. One thing that we have, discovered as we've started some of this co-op development work in St. Louis is you could often do a lot of different things with the co-op you want to make. You don't even have to necessarily be a legal entity, but you can also adapt the legal entities that exist to what you want to do. So that's when you talk to a lawyer and they'll tell you how you can make it work. And then finally, continuing the work. So after you've talked to the lawyer, you've gotten your official setup done, then you can figure out how you are going to actually make your co-op be successful. And so we'll jump in step by step into each of these options. And to do that tonight, we are going to have a fictional co-op that we're going to use as an example. They're called Bricks and Caverns Arts Collective, and it's a local co-op, 7 local artists who are interested in working together to open a studio and a storefront space. And they think that they want to share this space, they want to create opportunities to collaborate with each other, and they want to develop programs that kind of bring their neighbors in and bring community into the space. So that's why they are starting this Bricks and Caverns Art Collective. So, finding alignment. The first step in the process is finding alignment. And the first part of that is assembling a team. So, if you're going to cooperate, you need other people who you're cooperating with. So that could be you just reach out to people in your community. Maybe you've had conversations with other people you know in the space you're working in, who might be interested. So it's really kind of reaching out to your existing networks and figuring out who might be interested in working with you on this project. The next part of this stage is identifying your values. We at Co-op STL think it's really important that cooperative work centers both the cooperative principles, which we'll get to in a moment, but also the values that you think are important because you can use your values to really guide how you're making decisions in the cooperative moving forward, and it can bring clarity sometimes when decisions get complicated. The next step in this finding alignment is researching similar models. The great part of cooperatives is that probably someone has done what you're looking at before, and you can use other examples to help create your model. So sometimes it's not necessarily exactly in the field you're looking at, but there are some ideas that can kind of generate thoughts about what your cooperative could look like. Um, and then finally, the last part of finding alignment is determining where exactly you're going to cooperate. We've been working with a cooperative recently that has decided that they do want to cooperate in some of their like marketing and in sharing space, but they're maybe less interested in cooperating in their specific like individual. They want to retain their individual branding as individual businesses. And so part of that cooperation is deciding exactly what aspects of either your business or your organization you're going to cooperate and where you're going to maintain independence. So when you get to the part of assembling a team, there are some questions that you should be thinking about that can help you decide, is this team really going to be successful together? The first one is looking for a wide range of skills on your team. So sometimes you want to make sure you have people maybe with some financial expertise, expertise in whatever, skill area you're looking at, expertise in facilitation or being in organizations together. So it can be useful to make sure that you've kind of got this skill representation across the board. Also, cooperatives often are trying new things. And so making sure that the folks who are cooperating together have this mentality of like, let's try something out and see if it works. And it's okay if we maybe mess up, but we can try something new. That's often a useful mentality to have in cooperatives. It can also be useful. You don't always have to equitably distribute responsibilities, but understanding that as you're going into it can be really useful so that you know that like what to expect from each other as you're starting to cooperate together. And also thinking about making sure that everyone is actually benefiting from the cooperative. And finally, are there existing power dynamics that exist between the people who are starting to cooperate? It's useful to name those. They might exist. And if you name them and are really clear about them moving start, you can think about what structures you can put in place that can dismantle these power structures and dynamics. So I'm going to pass it over to Jenny to work on this question.
Yeah, so speaking we can share in the chat, but just if y'all can reflect on like a successful group or team you've been a part of. So you worked on a project with some people and it like went really well. It was fun, successful. What do you feel like, what were the elements of that made it work well? Um, so in the chat, if you want to drop just a few ideas of like what made this group or team successful. So we have like,
You have M saying everyone brought different skills to the table that were seen as valuable. It's good to have a wide breadth of those principles, similar, sharing similar principles.
yeah, and that idea of like
Harley.
being oriented towards like principles and values instead of
Yeah.
specific ideas, which we'll talk about like how, and Zadi said earlier, like we feel like it's really important for as co-ops start to set those values up, because it really helps kind of keep the big, like a bigger picture focus, um, even when you're like trying new things.
Yeah, trust in each other's vision and intentions is a big one because I think ideally, you would say that co-ops operate transparently and, having everyone's taking risks together. Everyone is very aware of what all the practices are. There's no hiding it, ideally. So yeah, making sure that the people you have with you trust your vision and intentions and vice versa.
Cool. And another question just to think about, um, a group or team that you've worked with that wasn't as successful, that kind of struggled. Maybe in the end, yeah, did the thing you wanted to do, but it was a rough ride getting there. Are there anything that stands out of like why that was more difficult?
Differing levels of buy-in.
Yeah. That's definitely something that, as Zani continues on this sort of path of launching the co-op, right? Like, something we will always sort of drill in is like being really clear about like what the expectations are, what it means to be a member of the co-op, what those responsibilities are, what the benefits are, so that, it's clear if you're a member, we're all kind of like buying in at the same level.
Awesome. So now we're going to hop back to our friends at the Bricks and Caverns Artist Collective. So as this group is thinking about assembling a team, these seven artists are talking together about what are the skills, resources, and connections they each bring to the table. And as they're kind of having this conversation with each other, they're realizing that they have strong community connections. Like that's a really a big strength of their work. And they've got a couple members with business and sales experience that they can use as they launch this cooperative together. But they also, at the same time as they're talking about these roles and skills, they're realizing they may need some support with coordination and marketing. And they're not ready to necessarily bring in new members at this point. They want to start with these seven artists. So they decide that maybe they're going to contract these skills out until they're ready to recruit new members to the co-op. They also, some of these members are full-time artists, and they know that as they're engaging in this cooperative, they're going to dedicate all their time to their art and to development of the cooperative. But some of the other members really only work on their art when they have free time. They maybe have other jobs that they're responsible for. And so they start to talk about how these dynamics might show up in the co-op and how they can create structures that can maybe mitigate some of the dynamics that those bring to the table. So the next part of this finding alignment stage is identifying values. And at Co-op STL, we always like to kind of root in the Rochdale Cooperative Principles, which are 7 international cooperative principles that kind of ground the whole cooperative movement. So these are voluntary and open membership. So everyone is kind of free to join a co-op. There's no exclusion, based on identity or anything like that. Education, training, and information. So knowing that as we're cooperating together, it's really important to continue to learn together and build skills. Autonomy and independence. So each
Cut out for some reason.
sound check.
Yes, there we go.
Weird. Okay. Autonomy and independence. So making sure that every cooperative has control over itself. There's no outside body that is coming in and controlling each cooperative. Democratic member control. So usually that means, one member, one vote. Everyone who's a member of the cooperative has an equal say in how the cooperative functions. Concern for the community. So thinking about whether it be a social community or a location-based community, really thinking about how we can support people outside of the cooperative. Member economic participation. So whether this be time spent in the co-op, an actual financial contribution, some kind of economic contribution into the cooperative. And that usually means something going in and also things coming back out. And then finally, cooperation among cooperatives. So making sure that cooperatives are supporting each other and sharing what they're learning with each other is really important to the movement. So these, we think should ground every cooperative, but you can also come up with your own values that speak beyond these 7 cooperative principles.
So yeah, thinking back on the general cooperative principles, were there any values or principles that stood out that kind of resonated with you? And we can go back to that slide. So drop it in the chat, anything that kind of sticks out, it feels like a good fit for you and your soul. Nice.
Education, training, and information.
Yeah, it's a really important one. Um, Especially in these like beginning phases of a co-op because just sort of the basic foundations of getting everyone a sense of understanding of what it means to be a part of a co-op is really important, but that work continues as long as the co-op exists. Yeah, and the
Democratic
democratic
member
member,
control. Yeah.
yeah, that's like the beauty of the co-op, right? Is that we've got the people who are running it get to make the decisions, and practicing democracy in our workplaces is really cool.
Thinking that too. Cooperation among cooperatives, which is what we're all about.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, just wondering in terms of values, have y'all encountered these before? It could be like more formally or informally, but are there other values that you love from groups that you've been a part of in the past or currently? Or why is that past? I feel like sometimes when we develop,
Dynamic change.
oh, nice.
That's good. That's what the principles in particular are for.
Yeah. I do feel like values sometimes are a thing that we sit down and, if we do it formally, we like create kind of like mission statement-esque, and it's like sometimes you don't reflect on them very
Mm.
often. So the other thing that's really nice, I think, just to keep in mind if this is the way that you like end up, focusing on starting your co-op, and the values is a part of that, to find ways to incorporate that into some kind of monthly work, whether it's like your meeting to like center one of the values at it, just to keep them at the forefront, and keep everyone on that same page.
So our friends at Bricks and Caverns Artist Collective have read the Rochdale principles and they really want to center those. They think that they're important, but they also want to have their own values that they want to use to guide their work. And secretly, these are adapted from the Cooperation STL values. But the Bricks and Caverns Artist Collective decides that they want radical inclusion. So they want their cooperative, they want their spaces to be inclusive and to break down systemic barriers. They want to have mutual support and collective care. So they are committed to really being there for each other and for their community. They're committed to St. Louis. And so all the work that they do, whether it be in their art or the programming they put on, really has that connection to St. Louis as part of it. Community connection, they really value having community spaces and being open to the people around them. And also joy. They want to make sure that the work they do has that spark of joy, whether it be in their programming again or in the art they're creating. So the next part of this finding alignment, it's like an ongoing process, is researching similar models. And so up on the screen, we've got the different types of cooperatives that are out there. And knowing that these types of cooperatives can help you start to narrow into different models. So worker cooperatives are the members are the workers, so everyone who works there has that decision-making role. You have credit unions where anyone who banks there has membership and ownership. You can have nonprofits where obviously there isn't that like financial stake, but that there is equitable decision making throughout the whole nonprofit. Consumer co-ops, the people who purchase at that co-op can be members, purchasing or retail co-ops. So that could be a bunch of people coming together to buy things in bulk and lowering costs in that way. Housing co-ops where you share ownership of a housing space. Producer co-ops, so these are often farmers who maybe they each have their individual farms, but they're coming together to collectively sell and market their products. And multi-stakeholder cooperatives. So those can be kind of a combination of these different structures, where maybe if it's a grocery co-op, you have both the workers and the purchasers are both members in different ways in that co-op. So there are different ways that these can kind of mix and match together depending on the organization and structure. So as Bricks and Caverns are thinking about their cooperative, oh yeah, I see a chat question about a worker self-directed nonprofit. So in a worker self-directed nonprofit, so it's a 501c3, it's a nonprofit, so that there is not necessarily like you're not putting in capital, you're not really owning the organization and getting profit out of it where you might in a regular worker co-op, but there is strong efforts to kind of make an organization non-hierarchical and make sure that the workers who work there are the ones usually making decisions. So there are structures where there is a board, which is legally required, but they have a purely oversight role and really let the decision making live with the workers who work there. And that can be valuable in some nonprofits and maybe less in others. So it really depends on the type of work that they're doing. Yeah, so Bricks and Caverns, they're looking at the landscape of what co-ops might exist across the country and the world, and they've identified a couple models that they might want to replicate and think about. So there's the Ottawa Glass Blowing Co-op, and this is really a shared studio. Glass blowing is obviously a pretty expensive, a lot of equipment that is required to do this work. And so knowing that there's a shared space and shared equipment, they're thinking about, okay, maybe we want to share our studio space together. Then there, on the other kind of other side of it, there's the St. Louis Virtuoso Collective, which is a shared gallery and market. So these artists aren't necessarily making their art in the same space, but they are renting a storefront together and collectively selling their art and showing their art in the same space. And somewhere in the middle is like the Box 13 Art Space, which is an art collective where the artists have some shared studio space. Maybe they're collaborating with each other on their projects sometimes. And also they have a shared kind of gallery and studio, a gallery space to show the art together. And so these are kind of the range of ideas that the Artist Collective is looking at to help pick and inform what they want to do. And so kind of coming off of that, looking at models can help inform how you know where you want to cooperate. And some key considerations when thinking about this are, do members of the co-op want to retain any independence, or do they want to fully cooperate in every single aspect of the project? Are there any projects and or resources that will be easier or more difficult to access collectively? So maybe if it's a kitchen co-op, you know that if you go in on buying certain equipment or certain supplies, it's going to be cheaper and easier to access if you go in collectively. But there may be times where it's actually more difficult to access resources collectively. And so kind of having that understanding will help guide those decisions. And then also have other cooperatives attempted to cooperate in the ways you're thinking about, and have they been successful. So if you can talk to other cooperatives and see what they've tried, doesn't mean if it's not happened before that you can't try it. I think it's always important to take risks, but you can start to see what other folks have done, and that can help inform whether you might be successful in cooperating in that way. So the Bricks and Caverns Artist Collective decides they want to cooperate in some areas and not in others. So they are going to cooperate in sharing a studio space and in a gallery / market space. They want to purchase collectively any expensive equipment that they might share together. And they want to have community events that they work collectively together to put on. But some places they don't want to cooperate. Right now, they want to retain some independence in their projects. So for now, they've decided we're going to make our own art. And maybe in the future, we might think about doing projects together. They're all purchasing their own supplies because they each have different requirements that they need for the art supplies that they're purchasing. And they're retaining their kind of their own branding and their kind of own identity as artists under this collective. So that is the kind of finding alignment stage. And now we're going to transition into thinking about membership and governance. And these are when you kind of start getting into the nitty gritty of what does it mean to work together. So the first part of that is defining your membership. As I talked before, there's multi-stakeholder cooperatives. So sometimes you can have different types of membership, or you might just have one. It really depends on the cooperative you're developing. And then once you know who could be a member of your cooperative, you can think about what the governance structure looks like. And the governance means how you're making decisions together, how you're thinking about operating sometimes that's separate as well. So when thinking about defining membership, we like to frame it in this kind of three-part structure of requirements, responsibilities, and rewards. We think about requirements as things you kind of need to come into the co-op with. So that could be maybe you spend 3 to 6 months in a trial period with the co-op to see if you work well with the other members of the co-op. Or it could mean that maybe you have a commitment to the community or some kind of prerequisites for being part of that co-op. There's also responsibilities. So these are the things you commit to doing once you're part of the co-op. So that's usually taking an active role in decision making or taking on a specific role that the co-op needs to be successful and thrive. And the last thing is rewards. Obviously, we're cooperating because it benefits each other. And so thinking about rewards are, what are we actually getting out of the co-op? So in a housing co-op, that could be more affordable housing. In a worker co-op, that is like the ability to have a say in the decision-making space and also to get some profit from the workplace. So Bricks and Caverns Artist Collective starts to brainstorm where they fall in this requirements, responsibilities, and rewards kind of schematic. So the requirements that they think that anyone who becomes a member has to be a St. Louis-based artist. They need to be part of a 3-month trial period to see how they work in the space. And they need to have a commitment to community programs. And if you remember back in the values, commitment to community was important. So they want to make sure that's an important requirement for joining this collective. Responsibilities, anyone who's a member of this cooperative has to take a shift in the storefront. It can vary depending on how much time they actually have to commit to the co-op. There has to be some kind of commitment to showing up in the storefront. They also have to take on some kind of organizational role. And so this could be doing the finances, it could be taking a facilitation role in meetings, but there has to be some kind of responsibility role that each member takes in that way. And they also have to be active in decision-making at the co-op. And then the rewards that they get from being a member is that they get access to the gallery and the studio space. and they have the connections to the other artists who are members of the co-op. And this was just a harken back to community connection. That was one of the values that was important to show up.
So thinking about sort of those three components, responsibilities, requirements, and rewards, I know folks came in with maybe a loose idea of a co-op in their future. If you want to drop in the chat, kind of brainstorm, what could one responsibility of that co-op of the members be for your co-op, one requirement, and one reward? So how do these kind of fit into what you're thinking for your co-op? And it's not set in stone. We won't hold you to it. So throw anything out there. And these are all going to be really like specific for your idea, right?
Think about what it is that you need with the co-op you're making. Do you need from somebody? What is that person contributing to the whole group? Housing, reward, care of the house. There's responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, so in like Sandy's housing land trust idea,
Mm-hmm.
the benefit, the reward is that you have a house, but you got to take care of it. It's the responsibility. Does anybody else have any other ideas? You can drop in the chat or come off mute. Otherwise, we'll go to our next slide.
I was kind of writing and then I realized that maybe just talking about it, but clearly I think that maintaining the space and shared materials equipment. Um, and then I hesitate to like say that like acquire I the to hone in on the requirement of like a time period of trying it. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's just it feels really good because you're working, you want to make sure it feels like a good fit for everybody. And then reward, I mean, equipment and being an artist can be really expensive. So any shared um, part in that part and being able to network visibility can be really great.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know you were saying like, oh, honing in on that kind of like requirement of like that trial period, but that's like a very common requirement for cooperatives, especially because the people, if you think about like if there's a group of people who are founding a cooperative, they're doing a lot of pre-work together and really figuring out how they work together. And so when a new person comes in, it's sort of like a substitute for that pre-work that happened, right? It's like a time for them to get to know the co-op and for y'all to get to know them. Um, and yeah, it's very common to have in place.
I also think with that, like, again, so much of this is kind of trial and error. So you might start with like a 3 month trial period and then realize that maybe that's too long or too short. And so you can always make changes. Nothing is stone as long as you decide it together.
We got responsibility, work one shift per month from in person, a certain amount of remote work per month. Reimbursement must take on a clearly defined and needed role, and reward access to or requirement, sorry, must take on a clearly defined and needed role and reward access to all events.
Nice.
Awesome.
I feel like like sometimes, I mean, obviously if you're launching your co-op, you'd be doing this, you'd be creating these with the other co-op members, right? Those initial members. But I do think that this is the time to like get really specific and make it really clear. And the counterpoint to that, as Andy brought up, is after a little while, these are things that you would always come back to as well and reevaluate and change if necessary. So making sure like the initial people are a part of that, kind of setting up these responsibility requirements and rewards, but making sure that it's sort of like a constant touch point too. Cool.
So we're gonna jump very briefly into governance. We have a full workshop on our website that gets a lot deeper into it. But this is gonna be the next step. After you think about membership, you think about how you actually kind of slot all your members into a structure. So we've got a couple different, like we call components of cooperative governance. Usually the heart of it is a member. But there are some other different components you could have. You could have candidates. So these are the people in their trial period who maybe you decide that they have some decision-making authority and maybe not in some other spaces. And you can talk about what that looks like. You might have a manager, and this person might not actually be part of the cooperative in a way that they have ownership, but sometimes cooperatives get so big that they need that kind of operations management role to distribute power and have some kind of way of directing the progress of the cooperative. You can also have boards, that's usually more traditional and nonprofit, or leadership circles where folks come together. They might be elected or selected by the community. You can have committees, and these can kind of come up from the words of like, we're going to have a committee that focuses on sales, and we'll have a committee that works on marketing. So you can decide to kind of split people up into different either operations roles or decision-making roles to committees. And then we also like to highlight sociocracy circles. So this is a specific way of kind of structuring governance that has like interlinking between different decision-making areas, but also kind of distributes decision-making so that not everyone has to be a part of every decision-making role. So Bricks and Caverns, when they're talking about their cooperative, they decide that they're just going to have everyone at the decision-making table to start. And they might change it in the future, but to start, they want to have everyone there at the table. So they are just one big circle making decisions together. At the same time, they do want to take some of the roles of that are going to make the co-op successful and kind of distribute those out. So they have one person who's really focused on operations and how everything is going to work together. They have a couple of folks who are going to really focus on the studio and the storefront and make sure that those that everyone has time in the space, that there is a schedule, and that those spaces are kept neat and clean. And then they have both a member and a candidate who are in charge of community, so these are community events that they do. And so they're distributing some responsibilities, but having big decisions kind of held all together. The next big step is identifying funding sources. And for this, we kind of see that there's two major components of identifying funding sources. The first is just determining how much money you actually need. Sometimes it could be the cooperative just needs enough money to rent a stall at the farmer's market. But you could also need enough money to buy a full building. And those are obviously very different capital needs. And there's also differences in how much money you're going to need upfront versus how much you're going to need on a monthly ongoing basis. So it's kind of identifying each of these different capital needs, how much it's going to be, and if it's one time or ongoing. The other part of it is once you know what money you need, you can think about how you're going to get it. So that's connecting with different funders. You can get bank loans. You can self-finance with money you already have. You can seek private investment. This could be friends or family. Or you can work with co-op-specific lenders, of which there are a couple of them nationally who really focus on and know the requirements of co-op financing. There's often also just a combination of any of these together that make co-op successful. And again, we said it can be complicated to find this funding, but co-op developers like Co-op STL can help brainstorm and think through and connect with the best options for co-ops. I see in the chat that there is a question about what a candidate is. So a candidate is basically a provisional member. They're in this 3 or 6 month or 10-month, whatever the trial period is. So the intention is that they eventually become a member, but they are not one yet. And so you might decide that they have some decision-making authority, but not maybe there's some really big decisions that you want to retain just for the core membership. So that's just a decision making tool essentially. So I'll pass it over to Jenny.
Yeah, so uh Sonny's going through sort of the financing of a cooperative. I want to kind of just do a check in the Zoom room of what feelings come up for you when you think about financing a co-op project. Um, it might be feelings just generally about financing any project, but if there's something specific to co-ops too. Um, it can be an overwhelming part of starting something for sure. Or maybe an exciting one. How are we feeling? Feel free to come off mute too.
I mean, I just feel like it's a whole other way of participating in capitalism that people aren't really used to framing their thoughts around. So it can be hard to pitch that to someone maybe who has capital and is just interested in investing, who may not be super familiar with cooperatives. Just like the ideology part of it.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of like education, I think, that goes into any like a lot all the aspects of the co-oping or co-ops, but like particularly financing. Um, and I feel like depending on how the co-op is structured too, even communicating that within the group itself, even before you go to outside investors, because not everyone maybe has some of the like financial literacy at the same level. But totally, it's definitely a little bit more of a lift to ask folks who are, you know, all of us are used to operating within capitalism, like the traditions of that. I don't know if that's the best word to say, but yeah, you have to kind of get folks to start thinking creatively, and sort of open up new possibilities. One of my a quick example of that at Garrity Tools, we have we distribute our profits or our patronage based on hours worked. And someone who was a member of the co-op was talking to someone else, and the person was like, well, why would you get more worker owners? It just dilutes the pool of profits. Like that doesn't make sense. But the way our co-op is set up, if someone's not a worker owner, their hours that are associated with profit have to stay in the co-op. So it's not, we still don't have access. Like everyone's labor is accounted for, and it either goes to the co-op or it can be distributed to people. And so, but it was interesting because they were like, oh yeah, that's like, I guess that's a good point. But then we were like, no, wait, that's not how it works. And we are like 2 years into the co-op, like still being like, yeah, man, huh? Like, so it's just a constant, like, deep thought, education, understanding how we can move and create a new system to like move resources around.
Yeah. And from the chat, I'm super interested. I strangely love budgeting, etc. So I'm interested how to do financial focused things within mutually beneficial systems, which I think really goes to the point where we're just talking about financial institutions not really understanding cooperatives or being slow to trust them. Being not quite understanding the values portion of the enterprise and how that is not necessarily conflicting with the financial part of it.
And there's so many like really fun ways. I also love budgeting, and like spreadsheets and stuff. And I feel like there's so many f unique ways that different co-ops set up how to share resources, and specifically like the money made. So it's definitely like a fun world to be in to get creative with it.
So our friends over at Bricks and Caverns Collective, they go through these two steps. So they first think about like what actually are their capital needs. They find a studio and gallery space that they can get access to for $1,500 a month. So they know that moving forward, that's going to be an ongoing expense for them. They also identified there's probably about another $200 a month in kind of other operating expenses that they're going to need to cover together. And also, they have to build out their space, and they think it's going to cost them about $20,000 upfront to do that gallery build out. And they also have to buy an $8,000 piece of major equipment that they know they're going to share. So they've kind of identified, there's probably other expenses, but these are the major ones that they're thinking about. So then after they've identified these, they're thinking about how they're actually going to get that money. And so for both the studio and gallery space rent and their monthly operations expenses, this is going to be monthly member payments. And so each member knows that they're going to pay about $200 a month out of what they're profiting from from their art back into the co-op to make sure that these expenses can get covered. And then for their major upfront capital expenses, they decide that they are each going to put $1,000 of their own money into a capital contribution to help build out that space. And then they'll cover the rest of that money with a loan from the bank that they're going to pay back. And then they actually have a member who already owns that major piece of equipment that they need. And that member is going to basically sell that piece of equipment to the co-op over time through reduced member payments. So it's a benefit to that member in that they maybe pay less every month until that piece of equipment is purchased. And then the co-op doesn't have to go out right away and figure out how they're going to finance that piece of equipment. So this is basically how they're thinking about how they're going to fund all of their needs. So that is funding, and we're going to move on to very briefly talking about talking to a lawyer. So this is we're not lawyers. We don't give legal advice. So we really think like once you know how you're going to structure things, talking to a lawyer who's familiar with co-ops is going to be the best way to go to figure out the best structure. And a co-op lawyer who knows how cooperatives work is basically going to be able to look at what your values are, how you're thinking about membership and governance, how you're thinking about funding yourself, and pick out the best legal structure in the state you're in the city you're in, to really identify what's going to work best for you. And it could be an LLC, it could be a 501c3. If you live in a state or an area that actually has a co-op designation, it could be a co-op in a legal entity. They're also going to help you develop your bylaws that you need to establish whatever legal entity you need. And so all of these decisions you've made up until this point is going to basically be great fodder for this lawyer to basically take and help you turn it into bylaws. So as much information as you can provide ahead of time is useful, but the lawyer is going to help you get it over the finish line. And then finally, the last stage is just continuing the work. A big thing we want to make sure we're constantly reiterating is that changes will happen. You're going to make a decision, you're going to try it for 6 months, you're going to realize this doesn't work for us, or actually maybe we really love this and we want to continue it. But just making sure you're not afraid of making changes. And also eventually you'll probably add new members. And members are also going to bring change, but they're also going to kind of grow into the culture of the co-op you have. So it's always kind of delightful to see how new people who are curious about cooperation are going to get involved in your co-op and be part of your community. So I'll pass it over to Jenny.
Yeah, just to get a little temperature check as we're getting towards the end here. Um, does your cooperative project feel more achievable after what you've seen outlined in the workshop? Could be a simple yes, could be a simple no. Or if there's something specific that stood out to you that you learned about tonight that you're like, oh, that was like helpful. It makes me feel like I could tackle it. Feel free to put in the chat or come off mute. Maybe it was something small, like that one cooperative principle.
Or even just thinking about what's one thing that you would like to hear that would make you hear about and learn about that would make you feel more confident
Yeah.
and make it feel more achievable.
Kawai said yes, especially the reminder of building the
Yeah.
system and values first. Yeah. I think
Hmm.
the pre-work is one of the most important phases. And taking the time to make sure that everyone is aligned with sort of a North Star and being able to even just take the time to get to know each other, eat meals together. Like, these are people that you're going to be working really intimately with, and making really big decisions that you're going to be working in. Co-ops are like just naturally more like human centered, right? But they're also still like, depending on the type of co-op, they're still like working within capitalism. So you have sort of like a capitalist relationship with it and also a human one, which can be at tension at times. So just making sure you're like getting to know each other and that you're on the same page and then writing those values down. Cool. Anyone else have other thoughts? We're going to move into kind of just like question time. So we'll open the floor. If there's anything that we covered that you want more details about, other just questions, things that you were, wondering about that we didn't cover in terms of like, what does it mean to start a co-op? Could be super basic, could be more in the weeds. We're open to any questions. We have in the chat, I feel like I have a lot of work to do that I didn't really think about before.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like as someone that like, so the co-op that I work at was a company that we transitioned to a co-op, so it wasn't started as a co-op, but even just in like forming it as a co-op, there were many things that we didn't even know to think about. And so, just the idea of like things will change, things are always changing for us because we're learning more about what it means to like be a cooperative as we go.
Yeah, and also from the chat, I think it's so valuable to say things, ideas aloud to other people to get out of your brain. Great first step, especially in a cooperative where, you're trying, it works better if you work, coordinate better together.
Hmm. Totally. Well, yeah, do y'all have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute. Got some co-op geeks in the room, so
Hmm.
let it loose.
This may get a little bit into the weeds, but I know that
I'm
with
here for
grant
that.
funding, yeah, um, great. Uh, I know with grant funding, they're hesitant to, oftentimes grants are hesitant to not fund any nonprofit entity. And then it would be usually an individual, other than having some sort of fiscal sponsorship. So, uh, how are co-ops looked at? Does anyone have any experience with like grant funding and co-ops?
I think because there's so many different forms a co-op could take, like if it's a 501(c)(3, like worker self-directed nonprofit, so like they're operating like cooperatively, but their 501(c)(3 status maybe, allows them to apply for other grants that nonprofits would. I would think that's probably like the most common like co-op type to receive grant funding. But I think that on the surface, or what maybe if there was a grant opportunity, that kind of as Andy was saying too, like when you get to the lawyer stage, like they'll help you decide what legal entity. So if like grants are something that you want to go for, like that should be a consideration when you choose your legal entity. Because I think not that you would hide the fact that you're a co-op, but it might not play as big of a factor for a grantor as it would maybe like a bank and getting a loan. And it might be more that this grantor provides funds to like small businesses. And if your co-op is set up as an LLC, you can be like, we're a small business LLC. And you might not even, and it might ask for like the owner, and you can just put one of your names down, like, but I would think that, yeah, the most common ones would be the nonprofit. But if it's something that is going to be a part of your operations plan to like go after grant funding, definitely something to consider as you're like deciding what legal entity to choose.
I guess the
Right.
largest number of grants require a 501(c)(3.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of like worker self-directed nonprofits, they like choose to compensate themselves in a way that like is fair for where they live. So
Hmm.
like as they're making those decisions together, you can think about like you want to align with if you're going out for grants from a foundation, you want to make sure you're listening to their requirements. If you choose the 501(c)(3) path, but you can also make sure that like you're actually paying yourself, but you need to like live in whatever community.
Hmm.
You just make profit. You can pay your wages appropriately, sustainable.
Yeah, I know when you asked the question, my audio cut out a little bit, but did you also say something about like in being like an individual in applying for grants? I don't know if you're like maybe thinking specifically about like artist grants.
Yeah, I just know that artist grants can go to individuals, and that's really the main funding source I think that happens to anything other than a nonprofit,
Yeah.
or some other sort of fiscal sponsorship. So I know that even in the space that I've worked with other artists, there's sometimes like, do we apply for this as a group or do we apply for it as individuals and then hope one of us get, those kind of certain things. And
Yeah. I
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I feel like it depend again, it's like a grantor thing, depends on the grantor, but like I do feel like artist collectives, that term is a very familiar, long-standing term, where whether or not an artist collective is like operating as like a more official co-op or not. But I do think yeah, it feels like within like the arts community, that sort of idea of applying as a collective is a thing. And sometimes grantors will also allow you to like apply as a collective and then also individually. So just put like seven, applications in. Um, but yeah, definitely in that world, it's like the art in the art world, I feel like is the one place where a single person can just like apply for money without a 501(c)(3) status. But there might be certain grantors or ways to approach it as a group, um, using the word collective basically to so they know what you're talking about.
Yeah, or even just among yourselves, like that's a good way to like formalize an agreement. Like, if we know if maybe some of us who get the grant, we're going to distribute it this way. We're going
Mhm.
to, handle the applications. This is how we divide up the work, providing all the documentation, and everything else. So that can be something that you can do and, on your own, even if the financial vehicle doesn't necessarily recognize it as a cooperative. But that's also where it really becomes important to formalize everything so you don't end up like, having conflict over ownership,
A
everything.
bunch of money goes into one of the people's bank account and then they're like, I don't want to be a part.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that also speaks to, something we touched on a little bit, which is like the sort of creativity of how to present co-ops within our traditional structures because there's not a lot of like clear paths for co-ops to participate in some of these things. Like, in Missouri, there isn't a way to say I'm a co-op legally. Like, you're an LLC, you're this, and then you have an operating, like a really heavy operating agreement that shows how operate like a co-op. So it definitely is still, I think, we're in the time of finding ways to fit into those systems that are in place. But hopefully, the more co-ops that there are, and the more ways we figure out and communicate with funders, with banks, with all these institutions that, we're here and like this is a new way that we could approach this, some of that will change. Any other questions in the room? Big ones, little ones? We'll also say like where if you guys, I don't know how everyone found out about the workshop. Actually, would you put in the chat how you found out about the workshop? That would be very interesting. But if you haven't been to our website, we have a bunch of resources on our website. We also last year, oh nice,
And if the website.
newsletter, email, cool. Um, yeah, we launched this workbook last year. And so that a digital version of that is on the website. But after this, if you have other questions, there's a bunch of, Zandi referenced a few throughout this workshop, but we have more detailed recordings of workshops about some of these specific things like governance and membership. But we're also available, we have a contact form on there. If you have a specific question, as I said, we're the room of co-op geeks. We love to think
Hmm.
about these things. And one of our goals is to help foster more co-ops in our area, and beyond. I know you're in New York. But if you have questions about your specific project, like please reach out.
I have two people came in through email, found out about it through email.
Nice.
Google searching solidarity economy in Missouri.
Oh, what is that called when we show up in Google searches? There's
Or
some
when
term.
you purposely make your try to show up in
SEO,
Google searches.
What was it, Sandy?
SEO, search engine
Yes,
Search
SEO.
engine optimization.
Cool. We still have a little time. If anybody does have other questions, we're happy to dive into anything or clarify anything. Um, no silly questions.
Is there a main list of current STL co-ops? We have some that we know about in our workbook. So that'd be a place to start. That's something else we were planning on building out is knowing where all the St. Louis co-ops and be able to share that information for folks who want to know more.
Yeah, our last couple of group meetings, we've been kind of strategizing how to build out like a list and then a map. Um, St. Louis is definitely still a very small group of co-ops.
Yeah.
But it also feels like we hear about new ones like at least once a month. And new to us, but not new. So
Yes.
they're out there. So hoping to kind of, yeah, get a more like main hub where folks can find them all.
And hoping to,
Months.
people didn't even realize there were other co-ops out here. And if you're looking for like there's a national directory through the U.S. Federation for Worker Co-ops as well. So if you're interested in finding co-ops in any particular area, you can see what they have listed on there.
Drop their website in the chat. But yeah, there's a directory on the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperative site. Cool. Well, if there's no more burning questions, we might wrap up a little early. But I'll sit here and wait to see for. Cool. Well, I'm really glad you guys came tonight. Y'all came. Uh, Hopefully you feel like you see a bit of a clearer path, or a more formed path to what it looks like to launch a co-op. Obviously we presented a lot and there are a lot of things to think about. And it's not, I think also just making sure that you give yourself time. It's not something that will happen in a month, unless you have a lot of time and everyone has a lot of time to dedicate to it. So just giving yourself some grace and patience, and remember to have fun and be creative along the way. But yeah, hope y'all enjoyed it, and um, check out our website. Keep reading our emails because we'll have more programs coming up through the end of the year.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here.